Hi, if you haven't already, please check out my video on the original 1984 Gremlins movie before watching this one, or watch it afterwards to enjoy the entire context of what I'm about to discuss. The first Gremlins movie was presented by Steven Spielberg, written by Chris Columbus, and directed by Joe Dante. It was about a young man who is gifted an adorable furry creature as a Christmas present. The film had its roots in the early 20th century RAF Gremlin lore, but was its own story, reflecting early Reagan-era wealth inequality.
The world's changing, Peltzer. You gotta change with it, you gotta be tough.
By way of nostalgic Hollywood movies in a setting reminiscent of the Frank Capra-directed It's a Wonderful Life. Gremlins' unique tonal mix of the cute and violent drew controversy, contributing to the creation of a new Motion Picture Association of America content rating, but the film was a considerable box office success. A sequel was immediately in the works, but how would it continue the franchise, and would it share the same unusual tonal mix of the first Gremlins movie? Would it continue as a mixture of comedy and horror? What new elements would it add? Why would it be made, and what would it have to say? Why would it eventually be considered an equal or even superior film to the original Gremlins movie, despite not being a financial success? And why is the redesigned Gizmo from Gremlins 2 now on the latest poster and branding of the original Gremlins movie? Why is Gremlins 2 an arguably greater Gremlins movie? According to Joe Dante in Starlog magazine, the original Gremlins was a film that was never intended to have a sequel, until it unexpectedly made money. In its very early development, soon after the release of the first movie, Joe Dante considered an irreverent Gremlins sequel treatment set in the city of New York. It featured random ideas and sight gags, such as a Gremlin version of controversial real-life vigilante Bernard Goetz riding in the New York subway, as well as a giant gizmo fighting a giant gremlin, knocking down the Empire State Building. Unsurprisingly, this treatment was written by Monty Python's Terry Jones. Sadly, Dante felt its tone didn't quite appeal to Warner Brothers. Feeling burned out by the challenges of shooting the first film, Dante walked away from developing a Gremlins sequel. Several further attempts were made to create a sequel without Dante. Writers came and went from the project, ranging from Ed Solomon, Todd Holland, Christian Matheson, and Richard Oughton to Clifford and Ellen Green. Ideas included Gremlins on a cruise ship, as well as Gremlins in Las Vegas, for which a script was written. In an interview with Paul Rollins at Money into Light, writer Steve DeJarnett notes that he had rewritten the script, which was then rewritten by others. According to Dante, nobody really wanted to go with it. In 1990, he told the LA Times, "What is there to wreck in Las Vegas except a very boring town nobody really much cares about?" A few years later, Joe Dante was once again offered a Gremlins sequel, but this time he was told he could do whatever he wanted with it. Acknowledging the progress in technology since the original Gremlins movie, Dante and producer Mike Fennell then tossed out the Las Vegas script and started from scratch. Next, they needed a writer. Jonathan Kaplan, who had originally helped Dante achieve his break in Hollywood, recommended to him a journalist turned screenwriter named Charlie Haas, whom Kaplan had previously worked with on the film Over the Edge, as well as other projects. Dante and Mike Fennell wanted to take the Gremlins story out of the Kingston Falls small town and, like in the previous Terry Jones treatment, into the big city of New York. However, whatever the adventure was, with all of the requirements of a puppet-based movie, it would have to be reasonably contained in its new location to be affordable. Haas took this brief and then had the idea, what if Billy and Kate grew up and got jobs in the big city? He also remembered just how loved Rand Peltzer's silly inventions were in the original film. This got Haas thinking about a new type of building he had read about, emerging during the decade. In the early to mid-1980s, some office and residential buildings had computer systems linked to a data highway of fiber optic cables running through their premises. They were monitoring the space and using sensors reacting to data ranging from the amount of people present to the temperature in the area. This data was used for controlling heating, air conditioning, ventilation, lighting, elevators, water, electrical, security, surveillance, fire protection, telecommunications, and electronic office services. With electronic devices integrated into these and ultimately lowering costs, these high-tech, energy-efficient buildings were being termed intelligent or smart buildings. In their infancy, some of the first smart buildings had been referred to as buildings with many brains and had unique inventions, such as talking elevators. But it was admitted that these didn't always quite work as planned. This reminded Haas about the filmmaker Jacques Tati, and particularly his films Mon Oncle and Playtime, with their approach to new technology integrated into modern living. With the location of Gremlins 2 being a skyscraper setting in New York City, it seemed an obvious idea to include a real estate figure as a main character, modelled on New York developer and popular tabloid celebrity Donald Trump. The filmmakers decided to position their Trump stand-in as the evil bad guy. Dante did not want to simply remake the first Gremlins film on a big budget. Whereas the original film was a horror with some comedy, this sequel would be a series of gags. He wanted to make fun of the original, with the self-awareness of Bob Hope and Bing Crosby comedies, the Looney Tunes cartoons, Harvey Kurtzman of Mad Magazine, and the unpredictable variety film that he adored, Hellzapoppin'. Dante had also grown up with the Mickey Mouse Club's Anything Can Happen Day and the interactive audience experience of his childhood at the Saturday matinee cinemas. He wanted that fun, comedy randomness in this film. Since the first Gremlins, the film's creature designer Chris Walas had won an Oscar for David Cronenberg's The Fly. At the time of pre-production on Gremlins 2, Walas was now deep into making the sequel to The Fly, albeit as director. Dante's other regular makeup and creature collaborator, Rob Bottin, whom he'd worked with very successfully on The Howling, Explorers and Inner Space, was now hard at work on Total Recall. So, who would provide the title characters? The only other available big-name creature maker in Hollywood was two-time Oscar winner and two-time nominee Rick Baker, winner of the first ever Oscar for makeup, and he was coming to an end on his work for Michael Jackson's Moonwalker. When approached to handle Gremlins 2, Baker was not interested in merely continuing the work of another creature creator, and with that he turned the movie down. But Dante and Fennell needed him, as there were no other high-end animatronic specialists available in Hollywood. Baker gave them his terms. He would be interested in redesigning the creatures in addition to creating unique characters for the film to be written into the story. He was then offered co-producer status and to provide as much input as he wanted. With inspiration from books such as Stephen Hall's Invisible Frontiers, Charlie Haas introduced a genetics lab into the smart building location, a narrative setting to allow Baker to create new types of creatures for the film. Baker and his team at Cinovation began on the film in mid-1988 and without a screenplay. According to a New York Times article, nearly 300 gremlins would need to be constructed. Dante had made a recent visit to media mogul Ted Turner's CNN headquarters in Atlanta. This inspired the smart building of Gremlins 2 to also contain a cable network among its many operations. Haas got to work on the script from late 1988 into early 1989, working with director Dante and producer Mike Fennell. A lot would change during this time. In May of 1989, under the working title Monolith, the film began shooting in New York. Many of the original cast members returned, as did new cast members, for this new sequel, Gremlins 2: The New Batch. After a totally random Looney Tunes cartoon intro, we discover that New York is the home of the Chinatown, where the grandfather from the first Gremlins film resides. He is now identified as Mr. Wing. Wing, who still owns Gizmo the Mogwai, is visited by Mr. Forster, a business manager for renowned real estate developer Daniel Clamp. Clamp makes a further offer to buy Wing's store from him in order to build a new Chinatown business center. The offer is declined. 6 weeks later, Wing has since died, and his shop is to make way for Clamp's new development. A mourning Gizmo ends up in the hands of a scientist. Across town, Billy and Kate head to work at the Clamp Premier Regency Trade Center and Retail Concourse. They do not enjoy the rude people of the city, and Billy feels that he is not getting the break he needs at work, which would help them plan their marriage. Kate works as a tour guide of the building. Billy works in the art department with his chain-smoking yuppie supervisor, Marla Bloodstone. Forster pops by to note how Billy isn't conforming to the corporate rules of the company, especially with the sentimental drawing of his hometown, Kingston Falls. Billy visits his friend Fred, a failed newscaster, now presenting late-night horror movies for Clamp's cable network. Fred mentions that a science laboratory in the building has taken a patent out on a new form of gerbil. The lab is run by the flat-out evil Dr. Catheter, who plans to dissect Gizmo. Billy overhears a courier copying Gizmo's signature whistle, which leads him to be reunited with the Mogwai, whom he takes to hide in his office. Daniel Clamp then makes a surprise office visit, and he loves Billy's work. Marla believes this could mean a big career boost for her and Billy, and insists they both go for an immediate dinner. Billy instructs Gizmo to wait for Kate, who is not happy to learn of the Mogwai's presence. Meanwhile, Gizmo is accidentally squirted with water, causing the Mogwai to multiply. The new Mogwai offspring have strong personalities and, as in the previous film, are led by a striped chief. Kate finds a silly Mogwai and believes it to be Gizmo, taking it home. At dinner, Marla gets excited and comes on to Billy, but he races home, where Kate spots lipstick on his face. Billy can see immediately that the Mogwai she brought home isn't Gizmo. Their old small-town acquaintances, the Futtermans, then turn up, but they manage to get rid of them before heading back to the building. The Mogwai have already eaten after midnight and been sighted. Billy and Kate try to cut off a water main to stop the Mogwai from getting wet. Billy is arrested. The next morning, Gizmo finds the monsters hatched cocoons and is captured by the creatures. Kate bails Billy out and they return to the building. Marla thanks Billy for the previous night, leading Kate to tell him he'll be in trouble if they make it through the day. The Gremlins infiltrate the building, creating irrational levels of destruction, leading the sprinkler system to be set off, which makes the creatures multiply. They guzzle down every serum in the laboratory, which births many different unique breeds of gremlin. Mr. Clamp is then attacked, at which point he orders Forster with Billy to take care of things. Can Billy, Kate and Gizmo stop the Gremlins before they leave the Clamp building and take out Manhattan? Of course they do. Given the New York skyscraper location of the film, real estate developer Donald Trump, owner of the city's recently built Trump Tower, was an obvious jumping-off point for the skyscraper-owning, real estate developer villain of Gremlins 2. Trump Tower was only 6 years old at the time of filming the movie. In addition to this, there are a few superficial similarities between Clamp and Trump. Obviously the name. There is a barely seen book that looks like Trump's own bestseller, The Art of the Deal, with a name probably inspired by the romance novel I'll Take Manhattan, written by Trump's friend Judith Krantz, that became a TV movie in which Trump had a cameo.
Just remember me and don't tell the world.
It's a throwaway verbal joke that's buried deliberately by the filmmakers as a blink and you'll miss it minor sight gag. There's also an arguable small amount of Trump's ego in there.
Developer saves city. I like that. Good.
In the original script, we see a shredded piece of paper in the office of Clamp's secretary that is specifically a letter from the American Vice President thanking Clamp for his party political donations. At the time, Donald Trump had raised funds for Veep George H.W. Bush in 1988, who became president the year that Gremlins 2 was filmed.
But it's not hard to raise money for Vice President Bush.
So politically, Clamp has a match to Trump, but this is all hugely diluted somewhat for the film, and visible for only about 2 frames of a second, if you really squint. The shooting script also reveals how the building has speakers that create a static used to send subliminal messages, including this from a deleted scene.
I've been thinking Mr. Clamp would make a great president.
Young Donald Trump for president, you say no, not now, right?
That's correct.
I'm not going to run for president.
And I won't be running for president.
And probably the most impactful connection at the time, the suggested start of a relationship between Clamp and Marla, which in name mirrored Trump's own very public affair with Marla Maples during the film's release. Although this coupling wasn't publicly known until after completion of filming Gremlins 2.
It's the time of the year that the maples are in bloom and the sap is running.
It brought a tabloid gossip element to the movie when it premiered that the publicity could ride on, even though the filmmakers even now still claim it was completely unintended.
The fact that there's like a character named Marla who's with this sort of Trump-like figure is pure coincidence. It's pretty
That's weird.
strange.
That's one of those.
But really, that's where the Trump and Clamp connections end. What little there is of Donald Trump in Gremlins 2 is more of a family-friendly nod to him. On the film shooting schedule, Trump is noted as an undecided cameo performance as the fire chief that speaks to Clamp towards the film's end. It's clear that the filmmakers wanted him in on the joke, but for whatever reason, it didn't happen. Dante said at the time that he knew that a Trump villain wouldn't play with an audience. He had done his research. Trump was a hugely popular celebrity. If you want a send-up of the bullish deal-making persona,
You should not have called Mayor Koch a moron. That was not good public relations.
Hey, what can I do?
I would say he's got no talent and only moderate intelligence.
Gremlins 2 isn't that. There are a lot of unique things going on in the writing of Daniel Clamp that begin with the smart building setting. Keeping with the airborne Gremlins lore, Roald Dahl book, and the previous Gremlins movie, technology is integral to the Gremlins films. As we know, the main character is called Gizmo, discovered by an inventor. Clamp is defined by technology, ripe for the Gremlins to feast on. This is really his main function in the film. He's not just about making money. And as with Rand Peltzer's inventions in the first film, many of them are full of bugs even before the Gremlins turn up. Clamp's own logo is a gleaming chrome vise, literally reshaping the world. At the beginning of both films, both Rand Peltzer and Clamp fail to make a purchase from Mr. Wing, but then get their way. In the original shooting script, Clamp and Rand Peltzer were actually intended to meet at the end of Gremlins 2, with Peltzer Sr. selling Clamp a waterproof spray that would protect Gizmo and would provide Clamp an alternative to purchasing expensive, industrial-sized tarps. A deleted scene has Clamp wanting to construct condos on the top of the Chrysler building.
The condos I want to build on top of the Chrysler building.
Hence him staring at it through a telescope later on. Clamp's temperamental wall-to-wall technology is a part of the film's smart building location, where electronic living and rampant 80s corporate conformity meet, but with the curious addition of cable television. In 1980, the Atlanta-based Ted Turner had pioneered the actuality of a 24/7 news channel with the cable news network CNN. Just before the development of Gremlins 2, Dante was scouting for his unmade movie Little Man Tate in Atlanta and took a tour of CNN at Turner Broadcast Studios as it was relocating to the new CNN Center. Turner owned the first ever superstation, broadcasting via satellite to cable networks around the USA. In the far corner of an empty basement, Dante recognized the set of a Saturday morning horror special presented by Al Lewis, best known for playing Grandpa in 1960s TV show The Munsters.
It's me, Grandpa. Welcome to the Screaming Room.
The poignant image is what inspired the character of Grandpa Fred. He seems to also have a hint of John Zachary, who was Joe Dante's own childhood shock theatre TV horror host.
Igor would run around like a werewolf trapped in the sunlight.
Cross-eyed puppet named Igor.
There was word at the time that Turner had a broadcast tape prepared on standby for the end of the world. Recently, footage from this has surfaced in which a brass band performs the hymn Nearer My God to Thee on the lawn of the old Turner Broadcasting premises that Dante had visited. A version of this video also became written into the Gremlins 2 script, and notice in the film, they too use a version of Nearer My God to Thee.
We hope you have enjoyed life.
For director Joe Dante, there's a much more personal angle to Ted Turner. This is where the movie especially has something to say. It involved the mid-1980s trend of colorizing old black and white movies. CNN, owned by Turner, ran a poll that found 61% of viewers preferred watching old black and white movies in color.
I just don't like black and white art.
Better in color than in black and white.
I live in a color age.
Turner had bought the classic film libraries of MGM, RKO, and Warner Brothers. He hired the company Color Systems Technology Inc. to colorize many of these movies. Turner even ran campaigns for these on TV.
More primetime exposure for classic films, more viewers than ever before, and of course, more revenue on every side.
The Directors Guild of America launched a copyright investigation into this practice. It brought great protest from directors ranging from Martin Scorsese and John Huston, critics Leonard Maltin, Siskel and Ebert, and of course Joe Dante himself.
It's no accident that most of the great movie stars came from black and white movies, because black and white movies, you look at people's faces. Color movies, you look at the drapes.
One of the most outspoken Hollywood actors was Jimmy Stewart, star of the beloved film that was a big part of the original Gremlins movie, It's a Wonderful Life, which had been colorized by another company, Colorization Inc.
I was just asking why? Why would they do this?
The screen on the right is Casablanca for the first time ever in color. On the left is the old black and white version.
Mr. Clamp only likes color.
Why is almost everyone looking at the screen on the right? That's because they prefer Casablanca in color.
Don't miss Casablanca, now in full color.
In a deleted scene, just before being attacked by a gremlin, Clamp, with genuine unironic delight, colorizes a broadcast of It's a Wonderful Life. Double the bad judgment when you realize it's a Christmas movie, playing in the summer. Dante had the sequence removed for being too similar to a moment from the Christopher Guest movie The Big Picture, released months before Gremlins 2. This is unfortunate as it really ties it into the movie nostalgia of the original Gremlins film. That and who exactly is doing an hour-plus long video essay on The Big Picture 35 years later. At the time that Gremlins 2 was made, Ted Turner announced that he was making a Donald Trump TV movie biopic. But I digress. The character of Daniel Clamp owes a huge amount to the performance of the actor who played him, John Glover. According to an interview with the Chicago Tribune, Glover didn't channel Donald Trump for the film, or anyone really. He took his lead instead from the boyish enthusiasm of Joe Dante. This led to the movie being reshaped and Clamp no longer being a bad guy. Another appealing element of Clamp links to a comment made by writer Charlie Haas in a Consequence of Sound article on Gremlins 2. While going from Trump and Ted Turner, Haas found himself writing someone less villainous and broader. Joe Dante then asked if Trump could be as broad as the actor Danny Kaye. Kaye was a big entertainer and actor of the 1950s. Dante has felt Kaye as a performer was an acquired taste, but thought the film The Court Jester to be one of the best written scripts of the 1950s. Kaye's wide-eyed, childlike performance in the film is not unlike the Clamp that Glover plays.
With the pellet with the poisons in the vessel with the pestle, the chalice with the palace has the brew that is true.
Good man.
The sunlight will come pouring through these front windows here and fry him.
Sir Giacomo, into your armor, and you to your place in the pavilion.
Clamp is not a greedy, domineering money man who just buys expensive things. He comes across more in the spirit of the ultimate aspirational American entrepreneur as adventurer and dream maker, Walt Disney. An inspiring, optimistic, creative leader, largely unworried by responsibility.
I'm confident we can create right here in Disney World a showcase to the world of the American free enterprise system.
This is especially true in the moment he first spots Billy working on his artwork.
Hey, this is excellent.
A genuine innocent sense of wonder in the Disney mold, applauding the warmth in Billy's work. The film introduces Clamp early on via a video presentation, where we only see how he behaves for the camera, holding a pointer stick and surrounded by artwork of future utopian high-concept ideas which look more science fiction like 1960s Disney Epcot rather than Donald Trump. Glover and Dante often have Clamp literally looking up on camera to the future, aiming high with the vision of a showman. The Clamp Center on film is also much like a Disney theme park, with its own guided tour, souvenir shop, constant overhead narration on speakers, and what could be faulty rides under repair. It's supposed to be sterile, oppressive and corporate, but under Joe Dante it comes across as a kind of fun wonderland. There's a connection to the protagonist as well. Billy's illustration of Kingston Falls looks like a map for Main Street Disneyland. At the end of the film, Clamp is especially enthused that this picturesque town comes from Billy's own life. Kingston Falls and its Capra Rockwell rendition of small-town America resonates with him. Clamp is the alternate universe George Bailey of It's a Wonderful Life.
And then I'm going to build things. I'm going to build airfields. I'm going to build skyscrapers 100 stories high.
The George Bailey that left Bedford Falls and did build the tallest buildings. Kingston Falls is literally a colorized Bedford Falls, which gives extra meaning to this deleted scene. At his core, Clamp is a nostalgic character from another time who is revealed to share the exact same warm values as Billy and Kate. Further proof of his modest, all-American suburban roots can be taken from a barely noticeable but highly personal detail that makes Clamp roughly the same age as director Joe Dante. On Clamp's desk can be seen a 1950s photo of his child self, dressed as a cowboy atop a pony. This was a phenomenon in suburban USA, where traveling photographers took photos of kids dressed as cowboys on ponies. In the 1940s, these children were brought up on Western serials and B-movies, and in the 1950s, the Westerns that dominated TV. Maybe the Western was Clamp's introduction to his interest in TV. It gives logic to Clamp's amusing dress-up as a SWAT team member, leading the charge like a child at the end of the film, scored by Jerry Goldsmith, like a heroic lawmaker of the Old West. Clamp is wholesome at heart, which makes his arc so satisfying. He's the inventor dad of the first Gremlins film, but successful. The film hints he's from the same small-town, middle-American world as Billy and Kate, and can directly relate to its ordinary qualities, which makes him very unlike Donald Trump. Years later, Joe Dante spoke about having been in the running to direct the movie Jurassic Park. He mentioned that he could only see the character of John Hammond as a bad guy compared to where the film went with him. It's ironic given how much he changed direction and humanized Gremlins characters Gizmo and Clamp, and both became much better as good guys. The more corporate side of Clamp comes through his business manager, Forster. Robert Picardo plays the role under an immaculate Ziggy-made wig and is clearly 3,000% invested in the character and steals all of his scenes, being deeply unpleasant. Forster could sort of be the next level of Gerald from the original Gremlins movie, conformist, condescending, status and image obsessed. Picardo came up with the idea to give Forster an impersonal barcode wand, a symbol of how he didn't need to know any employee's name, which Charlie Haas wrote into the script. In the shooting script, Forster is more actively suspicious of Billy, on his trail and directly involved in his arrest. A very dark and cynical moment from the script has a technician observe that there is little oxygen in the building. Forster instructs for the oxygen to be turned on at 4 p.m, the time at which everyone goes into a slump. The film begins with Daniel Clamp's monologue in Mr. Wing's store, which sets up the movie, and Dante cuts away to Forster twice. Frequently throughout the movie, Picardo is given props to fidget with, providing additional amusement that emphasizes his character. Throughout the film, you can see how he is respected as a voice of reason, especially among his group of snarky security officers, all sat confidently behind what they believe to be the indestructible safety of their computer banks. Forster enjoys being the smug, designer-suited 80s yuppie, exerting great arrogance even when he's a coward. It's quite apt that Forster eventually becomes reduced to an absurd running gag in which a female gremlin harasses him for his affections. The monsters are acknowledged as being male, but this gremlin has drunk a beaker labelled female sex hormone, giving them the form of a gremlin as adolescent male fantasy in a tight leopard print dress. Despite its biological creation, the female gremlin is really just drag straight out of a 1950s Looney Tunes cartoon, mixed with the cartoon-style stalking of Pepe Le Pew. Billy and Kate are still the heart of the film. They were the naive, wholesome exception in small-town Kingston Falls, and now they are the naive, wholesome exception in New York City. They live a modest life true to themselves and where they came from. Both are so committed to each other. Zach Galligan and Phoebe Cates do a seamless job of bringing over their gentle tone from the original film. The shooting script notes that Kate helped Billy get his job in the city, which shows he's still the meek nice guy of the small town. There are some instances where Galligan and Cates have to be adept at a kind of comedic screwball comedy, but they do this without compromising their characters' innocence and purity. These well-judged, deadpan performances give an emotional spine to the film that holds it together as a long-form piece and allows everybody else on screen, both human or not, to go much broader. Billy's boss, Marla Bloodstone, is a self-obsessed yuppie and also sort of comparable to Gerald from the first film, in that she is climbing a corporate ladder and desires one of the young couple. Marla selfishly comes onto Billy after his success with Clamp, but he doesn't succumb to her advances and ultimately doesn't even really have an arc. At every moment, he's 100% faithful to Kate and fearlessly monogamous. In the first film, Gerald never got to test Kate's devotion to Billy. There's a tragic loneliness to when Marla is left behind in the abandoned building, unable to find illumination in her dark office on a beautiful summer day. The gothic image of her entangled in a corridor spiderweb is not only fantastically beautiful, but also pretty poetic when you look at her place as interchangeable food to a hungry, man-made monster. Christopher Lee as Dr. Catheter basically fills the role of both Mr. Roy Hansen and Mrs. Deagle from the first film. He is an abuser of animals and also becomes the only real mortality in the film. Unlike in the first movie, you're entirely without guilt watching a vulnerable old person killed by scary creatures, when that vulnerable old person is the most iconic, colour, big screen Dracula. Originally, when Lee turned up to play the Doctor, he wanted to wear an Einstein wig and do a Bela Lugosi accent from under a long beard that he had grown. This physically reminded Dante of Commander Whitehead, a character from old Schweppes TV commercials. Both the director and producer persuaded Lee that the character needed to go colder. In the film, Catheter is aided immeasurably by Jerry Goldsmith's gothic church organ music theme.
I've got rabies, and I'm supposed to get the flu this week.
The vastly experienced screen actor fits right at home with Joe Dante's directorial style of eccentric villains, physical movement, and complicated camera blocking. This was Lee's 200th film role. Catheter's assistants, twins Martin and Lewis, look like characters from a 1950s comedy, which is apt given their names. Played by the Stanton twins, they have a fun chemistry with the Doctor and one of the wittiest introductions ever.
Hello, Doctor. How's the cloning work coming along?
Really well, Doctor.
Their colleague Wally, played by Sean Nelson, makes jokes about GMO tomatoes, topical at the time and less than 5 years before they reached American supermarket shelves. Gremlins 2 has another Dracula, but this one only looks like a vampiric monster. Second to Clamp, Grandpa Fred is the only other character to have a completely fulfilling arc. Robert Prosky brings so much heart to the film with this tragic victim of career failure. We see the indignity of someone with their heart in current affairs reduced to doing Dracula dress-up. In a deleted scene, he tries to talk to Clamp earlier on, but is brushed aside and humiliated by Forster. Fred is a dreamer past his prime, and, much like Dracula, in need of new blood to give him a second chance. His glove puppet Igor is a fun sight gag with a pseudo-gremlin design. Prosky's performance makes you think of the heartbreaking Rand Peltzer audition that Pat Hingle had given to Joe Dante on the previous film. It's so satisfying to see Fred actively take advantage of the gremlin situation, teaming with camera operator Kasuji, the overly energetic Japanese tourist stereotype played by Gedi Watanabe. Katsuji is gadget and technology obsessed in a movie series that undoes technology. There's an ominous feeling that Fred and Katsuji might end up as gremlin victims, but the creatures seem to respect their professionalism? Fred goes from comfortably hosting what the script describes as a Geraldo-style tabloid talk show, interviewing the brain gremlin, to being a full-on war correspondent behind enemy lines, while still in his Dracula costume. Rather than following the horror movie trope of introducing an elderly mentor figure and a deliberately annoying nuisance stereotype to be killed off, Fred and Kasuji instead have an unexpected, positive, and happy ending. The character of Microwave Marge is about the most caricatured the film has, performed by Kathleen Freeman, one of the funniest actors who ever lived, having worked with everyone from Jerry Lewis to John Landis. To me, she'll always be Ma Crackshell from Disney's DuckTales, which she was recording the same year as Gremlins 2. Marge is a cartoon character send-up of the daytime TV cooking show and where it was heading.
Once you learn a few basic microwave cooking skills, you'll wonder why you've waited so long.
Before we had microwaves, this used to take forever.
With factory-produced processed foods and instant meals posing as handmade homely cuisine.
Tuna noodle, cheese product, chowder surprise.
She delivers many self-aware and deliberately contrived lines with a straight face and old-fashioned earnestness. Marge is the Mad Magazine version of Billy's mother in the first film. With a wine bottle never far away, it's a tipsy performance with some physical comedy that can also stop with precision for when the horror takes over.
What's that? What is that?
Marge was supposed to be seen having a drink in the Clampatrium after fleeing the TV studio. While this was cut from the film, you can still see her in the back of this shot. Brushing aside their near-death experience on the first film, the sense of depression is gone from Murray and Sheila Futterman, as they now play like a sweet old couple on holiday. The Futtermans are small-town tourists in the city, but the small town hasn't left them. This is to the point where the Bat Gremlin attack is largely ignored by the onlooking citizens, who shoulder barge Mr. Futterman. In Gremlins 2, they are like adorable surrogate parents to both Billy and Kate. Jackie Joseph brings much positivity and sparkle to Sheila Futterman, wielding a 1950s flashbulb camera and realizing there was some truth to her husband's rantings. Murray Futterman goes from being the neighborhood weirdo to being actively heroically involved in the creature's demise this time, outside and inside the Clamp building. This role expansion seems natural given actor Dick Miller's regular appearances in all of Joe Dante's movies. In terms of its links to the classic airborne gremlin lore, Gremlins 2 has no real ties to aviation or the past world wars. The Bugs Bunny short Falling Hair is featured in a segment of Gremlins 2 that was exclusive to VHS. More on that later. There is of course the return of the post-wartime classic It's a Wonderful Life, colorized in Clamp's office. Additionally, when Gizmo loses Mr. Wing, he wears a similar bereavement armband that George Bailey wears after the death of his own father in that film. Murray Futterman still maintains the wartime feeling of us versus them that he had in the first film. But this time his paranoid opinions regarding a non-American threat are adapted to the reality of 1980s New York.
You going out of what?
Do you know they got Russian guys driving cabs in this burg?
The only other notion of othering the non-American comes with Forster's view of Mr. Wing, a line not included in the shooting script.
It's very charming. Confucius or Bruce Lee?
On that subject, Gizmo was originally supposed to seek revenge on the monsters, having taken the televised influence of Chinese-American Bruce Lee, but for reasons of anatomical practicality, how would you get a Mogwai to use nunchucks? He instead looks to the character of Rambo, a character with a musical theme also composed by Jerry Goldsmith. In the first film, Key Luke's Mr. Wing was a nameless character, existing only in darkness, which made him an ideal guardian for a sunlight-allergic Mogwai. Seeing Wing's shop surrounded by summery daylight and demolition work makes him feel noticeably vulnerable, especially with his severe cough. You can really feel Gizmo lose the person he called home. In Mr. Wing's one scene, the function of the character is to stubbornly defy change, both from Daniel Clamp and television. The Gremlins copy the worst behaviours of humans, and it's understandable that Wing would be overly protective of Gizmo. However, Billy treated Gizmo like a fellow human, teaching him to enjoy many things including television. That influence saved everyone from the Gremlins in the first film, and that beat is repeated here. If you want to read into it, Sylvester Stallone's jingoistic later incarnation of Rambo shows a significant jump in Gizmo's flag-waving patriotism in the first film. The most all-out cartoony assertion of Gizmo fully embracing the Western consumerism that Mr. Wing, paradoxically, was horrified by. Having said that,
Who's that? What'd he say?
He wants to know if we have cable.
No.
so maybe Mr. Wing got his way after all. Billy is now really ready to adopt the creature. With all of their more varied, cartoony personalities, the Gremlins look less like mythical reptile creatures and more like Looney Tunes cartoon characters. Whereas the first film showed the rational Gizmo influenced by television, Gremlins 2 feels as though all of the irrational Gremlins were influenced by television. In fact, most of them are born in a TV studio. They go from performing clever sight gags to visual humour, and in the Brain Gremlins case, being verbally sophisticated, commenting on gremlin civil rights, and aspiring to be like cultural critic Susan Sontag. And this time they sing along to a lot more than hi-ho. Creature creator Rick Baker wanted to make individual Gremlins characters woven into the script with his own designs, and not just interchangeable armies of gremlins. Baker also wanted to give these a 3D, Tex Avery cartoon sensibility. Ron Maygid covered Rick Baker's work on Gremlins 2 in Cinefex of May 1991. The character of Stripe from the first film returned, but for this iteration, Baker decided to turn the creature's mohawk hair into a fin-like spine. A vegetable gremlin was created with bladders on its face, and a vacuum was used to suck its ears into leaves. Two gremlins were named George and Lenny, based on the characters from the book of Mice and Men, a character trope found in many classic cartoons. The George gremlin was intended to resemble old Hollywood actor Edward G. Robinson. Lenny was originally created to be the brain gremlin, but at the last minute, Joe Dante didn't like the idea, so a standard gremlin was substituted instead. According to the script, he would sound like well-spoken writer and broadcaster George Plimpton.
Thrice welcome to Mousterpiece Theatre.
Actor Tony Randall would voice the creature. Baker used the Gilder Fluke system to enable the brain gremlin to talk. This was a computer system used for recording and playing back the characters' lip and tongue movements. For the brain's voice work, it was programmed at half speed but played back at full speed, repeating them every time. Baker suggested the creation of the Goofy Daffy gremlin. He also wanted to take to the challenge of designing a high-heeled female gremlin with curves, eyes fluttering and lips puckering. Anatomically speaking, this would not be the gremlin in drag that was seen in the first film. The gremlins were made using techniques including radio control, hand puppets, rod puppets, and limp floppy puppets, all life-sized. The rubber gremlin skins were made in separate overlapping pieces. High-tech telemetry suits were created for the upper bodies of most characters, operated remotely by puppeteers wearing corresponding sensors. The Bat Gremlin had a telemetry rig, as well as a stunt version and a hand puppet. The wings were operated through rods. Compared to Chris Walas' more rough and animalistic take on Gizmo, the little creature in Gremlins 2 looks cleanly groomed, more human, and with a tinier head. There were 11 different versions of Gizmo. A life-size Mogwai that had all self-contained mechanics. The mouths opened and closed, their ears wiggled, and their eyes moved left and right. The eyelids were made of plastic so they wouldn't tear. There were 4 types of puppet for all of the main Mogwai characters. The Mogwai faces were glued to vacuum-formed plastic that snapped onto an underskull mechanism. The whole face came off from the ears forward. Each Mogwai character had 15 different faces. The big Mogwais used for the close-ups were operated with cables and not servos, as radio-controlled devices took a month to make, whereas cable controls only took a day to create. The Gremlins had same-sized heads, with more mechanisms for the close-ups. Background Gremlins were very simply done puppets without much articulation. At the start of production, Rick Baker's company Synopsis Studios had a major research and development period. Everything was built twice to work out bugs or any other potential problems with the creatures. For this film, Baker wanted to make the creatures walk on camera. With his team, led by Steve Wang, human-sized gremlin and Mogwai suits were created, for which tests were filmed. These were never used in the final film. An elephant gremlin was also created, to be frightened of a mouse gremlin, a trope from Golden Age cartoons. However, this was abandoned. Another rejected idea had Dr. Catheter shape-shifting from Elvis and Einstein into this bizarre octopotamus monster. Rick Baker had an incomparable amount of resources compared to Chris Walas in the first film, and it shows. On the first Gremlins movie, Walas had the puppets operated by many of his creature crew that built them. By comparison, Rick Baker did not want local 44 special effects guys to operate the puppets and instead pushed for expensive Screen Actors Guild puppeteers. In the September 1990 issue of Cinefantastic, an inside source on the production claimed that 90% of the film actually used basic, hand-operated puppets, and $1 million worth of the sophisticated animatronics went unused on the production. This was apparently down to time constraints. Some of the Gremlin jokes were scripted and some were improvised on the day. A sheet of paper was put up on the set and anyone on the cast and crew was invited to contribute Gremlin gags. According to Mike Fennell in an interview with Bobby Wygant, Baker did a count of all the Gremlins made for the film and it was nearly 200 compared to around 100 on the first film. In a 1990 issue of Entertainment Weekly, Joe Dante said the budget for just the special effects on the sequel was the size of the entire budget for the first Gremlins movie. Baker worked very closely with Joe Dante on the puppet scenes of Gremlins 2. After the film was made, Baker was involved with the Nintendo video game tie-in commercial for the movie. As with the first Gremlins, production design for the film was overseen again by James Spencer. That's his surname in Neon, who had also worked with Dante since the first Gremlins and on Inner Space and The Burbs. A few shots seen in the film were actually filmed in Manhattan over a period of 3 days during the Memorial Weekend of 1989. These locations were Chinatown's Canal Street and Mott Street, the 23rd Police Precinct Station House, Times Square, where, unconventionally, a glass shot was used to execute Clamp's Chinatown advertisement. A piece of glass was placed in front of the camera with the painted advert, and the shot was created entirely in camera with no post-production special effects. This was a filmmaking technique that had been around since the dawn of cinema. Matte painting company Matte World created the effect. Production designer Spencer was also second unit director on the film, and he oversaw a sequence involving Mr. Wing's funeral, which was reportedly filmed with the skyline of Manhattan, meaning it would have most probably been filmed in Queens, New York. Doubling for the Clamp Center was the exterior of the 101 building in Park Avenue, which opened in 1982. It's not unlike the exterior of Donald Trump's own Trump Tower, which was opened in 1983. The most photoreal visual effect in the film is this. Why am I showing you this shot? Because in the film the starry drape was so convincing it made the Gremlins believe that it was nighttime outside, right? No, I am showing you this because 75% of it is a visual effect. Everything below this line is live action, which was filmed using a large format VistaVision camera outside of the 101 building in Manhattan. If you look at the bottom half of the trees, they are real, while the top half are all painted. Above the line, the buildings were separate layers of matte paintings. The doorway and drape were scale miniatures composited over the footage. Behind John Glover here is a much smaller scale drape used for close-ups. It's 100% fake, more movie magic from Matte World. The company also helped create a scene set at New York's impressive Cathedral of St. Eva Marie. Well, as any New Yorker will assure you, this Cathedral of St. Eva Marie doesn't exist. It's an in-joke referencing movie star Eva Marie Saint. Here she is, behind the scenes on the classic Hitchcock movie North by Northwest. That giant large format VistaVision camera, by the way, was also used to photograph many of the visual effects plates in Gremlins 2. So it's photographed both Eva Marie Saint and the Cathedral of St. Eva Marie. But if this isn't a New York cathedral, which city is it from? Actually, the entire upper portion of the structure was created using 3 separate matte paintings. The bottom of the building with actors Jackie Joseph and Dick Miller was filmed in Los Angeles at the Emmanuel Presbyterian Church on Wilshire Boulevard. The rest of the scene was photographed on the Burbank Studios backlot in California. Such is the quality that in many location guides it was often listed as being St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. The rest of Gremlins 2 was shot from June to Christmas of 1989 within the confines of the Burbank Studios in Los Angeles. Aside from a scene in a hilarious Canadian-themed restaurant named Chez Winnipeg, actually photographed at a Baroni's restaurant, which existed about 10 minutes away from the studio. While conceptually the Clamp building is like Trump Tower from the outside, and it does have a mall lobby, Daniel Clamp's building doesn't have doormen, exclusively luxury shops, gold-plated decor, marble, bronze, brass and mirror, or even Trump's major asset, residential real estate. Instead, James Spencer's concept for the overall interior of the Clamp building was steel and concrete. It was mixed with glass, artificial plants, fluorescent and neon lights, and, like in the first Gremlins movie, seriously 1980s textured wall designs. According to Starlog magazine, Dante believed Donald Trump's real mall to be dour and severely lacking in fun. His intent was to have an idealized version of the Trump Mall, where a Tiffany's boutique would sit next to a 7-Eleven convenience store. Most amusing to him was the storage company U-Haul having a place on the first floor. In a scene from the shooting script, a clothing store would be attacked by the Gremlins, unintentionally creating fashionable ripped denim. The entire Clamp Center lobby and mall was built on stage 16 of the Burbank Studios. It's an impressive open-plan 2-story vertical arena. The outer front of the building was also built on the soundstage. In this establishing shot, we begin in New York and cut to the indoor set in California. This shot is all artificially lit to appear like daylight. The New York exteriors were filmed in May of 1989, and in this studio interior shot, you can see Fred is reading an August 1989 issue of Variety magazine. There are no escalators in the mall, due to them needing to be imported by the production from Germany, but the placement of steps and the carefully angled, diagonal structures in the background would make you think they were there. With its chrome, futuristic piping, concrete and television studios, the Clamp interior looks less like Trump Tower and, weirdly, much more like the CNN Atlanta headquarters when Ted Turner moved into the facility in 1987. Along with the smart building concept, these elements make it a much more futuristic, technology and consumer-centric playground. It's a distinctly peculiar amalgamation of ideas and far, far beyond its starting point as a Trump Towers parody. That said, in 1985, with the threat of TV broadcaster NBC moving from New York to New Jersey because of rent increases, Trump announced a development called Television City on the west side of Manhattan. His plan was to house NBC with TV studios, a shopping mall, and the world's tallest building. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It never became. So, in an alternate universe, maybe Gremlins 2 is a documentary. Spencer wanted to make Clamp in his office appear friendless, above the clouds. There's one moment where Clamp walks out of his personal shower, and it is gold-plated, suggesting an unseen, private, Trump-like personal residential area. The office set was made from highly reflective steel and aluminium. Spencer stated that if Donald Trump is gold, Daniel Clamp is platinum. A 12-foot-tall, cut-out negative image of Clamp hangs on his office wall. This planning model we see at the front of Billy's office makes me wonder if it is a soon-to-be-failed Clamp casino. Watching the film in 1990, the Clamp building was totally state-of-the-art. A world of analog U-matic cassette tapes, CRT televisions, and the beginning of life-changing computerization. The depiction of energy-saving technology is very accurate, at least how it would look well into the 90s. Who doesn't remember the clunking activation of sensor-controlled lighting? Much love and attention was taken in dressing the sets. The biblical-looking wall mural in the reception of Dr. Catheter's laboratory is so well thought out, and you only see it in one quick shot. It is amusingly juxtaposed with the corporate logo and pun name of his business, Splice of Life Inc., Designer Jeans. Catheter's laboratory is designed like a circus within the building, with white and red stripes and an entrance tunnel full of animals. There are very personal nods from Joe Dante to other directors and films in the signage throughout the Clamp Center. W.H. Donovan, the title character of Donovan's Brain. Dr. Farb, the dentist from Roger Corman's Little Shop of Horrors. The aliens from The Day the Earth Stood Still. The aliens from Joe Dante's movie The Explorers. Jack Arnold, director of Creature from the Black Lagoon. A loving nod to Joe Dante's film producer mentor, Roger Corman, here labelled as a cost accountant. A tribute to Dr. Quatermass. A reference to the Vectorscope lab from Dante's Inner Space. Producer Robert L. Lippert. American International Pictures, Republic Pictures, John Ager, the star of movie Tarantula. There are even fun details like this emergency kill switch in the TV studio gallery. The production design is complemented by Rosanna Norton's costumes, which include Clamp's oversized suits that seem to be her own version of how Donald Trump is known to dress, but containing Spencer's motif of platinum, and what appears to be a reference to the hats from 1929 film Broadway. There's a wonderful old Hollywood feel to the office clothes of Kate and Marla. It's not just the costumes that take visual cues from older movies. James Spencer and cinematographer John Horrer hosted a screening for the crew of King Vidor's The Fountainhead, starring Gary Cooper, based on Ayn Rand's book. The Clamp foyer seems to adopt the stairway layout of the Fountainhead's Enright house, taking the black and white imagery of that movie literally, as even the plants are coloured black and white. The creative use of shadow work to show action happening off-screen was taken from Dante and Horror's love of director Michael Curtiz. In American Cinematographer magazine, John Horrer cites this moment from Mildred Pierce as a particular inspiration. With the New York location exteriors, Horror's intention was to channel the black and white work of photographer Andreas Feininger, such as his photographs of Grand Central Station. You can see the distinct shafts of light from this photo in interiors throughout the movie. John Horrer even nearly had a cameo in Gremlins 2, having played a scientist in Joe Dante's Inner Space, which he didn't photograph for the director.
I have to get up to 58. You have canceled floor 32.
In stark contrast to the old PSR cameras used on the first Gremlins movie, Horrer used a super modern movie cam as his main camera for Gremlins 2, as well as an Arriflex 35BL, allowing for many elaborate roaming Steadicam shots. An Arri 3 was used for silent shooting of the puppets in post-production. Horrer shot the film with the Cooke 3:1 20 to 60mm zoom lens. Since using it on the first Gremlins, the lens had become a favourite of the cinematographer. The use of the zoom allowed for many great developing shots where the camera can move and adjust from shot sizes between actors and puppets, all in one take, avoiding the puppeteers below them. A Tiffin No. 1 or No. 2 diffusion filter was utilised by Horrer when shooting the puppets to make them look less rubbery. Other inventive camera tricks included using finger grease on an optical flat in front of the lens. With all of this glass in front of the camera lens and in the zoom lenses, the film often has a very flary look when lights are in shot, but the image still appears contrasty and razor sharp. Unlike the first Gremlins movie, most of the creature footage was now shot at 24 frames per second, because of the more advanced puppetry. The glossy colours and steely textures in the summertime ambience suggest a very different tone to the first Gremlins film. Visual effects for Gremlins 2 were supervised by Dennis Michelson, previously the visual effects editor at Richard Edlund's Boss Films effects facility. A few miniatures for the film were constructed by the newly formed Stetson Visual Services. Miniatures included an elevator flying down a separately filmed miniature elevator shaft, with stop-motion gremlins animated by Yancey Calzada of Doug Beswick Productions. One of the shots featured a composited-on gremlin head with bulging eyes, which was created to be seen for only a few frames. It's a tiny detail undetectable when viewed in real time. Stetson also made a blink-and-you'll-miss-it scale model of the elevator crashing at the bottom of the shaft. Perhaps most impressively, they also made a miniature version of the clamp atrium, which features for 2 shots in the film's climax, photographed on a remote hothead camera by miniatures cinematographer Paul Gentry. Tiny Gremlins puppets were collapsed with wires, from which oozed green goo. Doug Beswick Productions created several clever shots of the Bat Gremlin, which very much recalls the style of pioneering stop-motion animator Ray Harryhausen's work on the Harpies for Jason and the Argonauts. These were photographed by James O'Pearl. The realization of the flying gremlin would make the gremlin pioneer Pauline Gower proud. In the shooting script, the creature defecates on a pigeon. For a shot of it swooping down, a focus pull was added optically at Pacific Title, who did the blue screen work on the film. It really makes it look like the creature is coming close towards the camera. Beswick also created a stop-motion spider gremlin for a couple of shots. The idea for the spider gremlin that Stripe turns into came from Joe Dante. Rick Baker then suggested the spider could be a mutant gremlin, to which Dante added to this idea of it being like a centaur. Charlie Haas had suggested it be the main adversary for Gizmo to defeat. He had also written a payoff for the concrete fate of the Bat Gremlin by having the creatures defeated by cement poured into the foyer of the Clamp Center building. According to Joe Dante, this ultimately proved too expensive to realise. The electrical gremlin was cell animated by Peter Curran's VCE, who had provided the Gremlin cinema shadows on the first film. The lightning character was composited into many shots with excellent reactive lighting provided on set by cinematographer John Horror. Disney character animator Mauro Maressa oversaw the animation of the electric gremlin, which was continued by animation supervisor Kevin Kutchever, who created the other lightning animation seen elsewhere in the film. You might recognize his style, as seen in many other films of the 80s. VCE also provided the opticals for the fourth wall break, in which gremlin hands were rotoscoped and animated to create 3 outrageous shadow puppets. Rick Baker was very inspired to make Gizmo walk. Much like Chris Walas in the first film, he too cited a Topo Gigio-inspired approach of filming the Mogwai characters against a black background. Baker did a test in which he used a video camera to photograph a puppet close to a blue background with puppeteers covered in blue material, their fingers puppeteering Gizmo's little legs. Using video chroma key, the blue could be replaced with whatever background was needed. These rough test results were fantastic. Unfortunately, when it came to create these effects for the movie, which was shot on the much higher resolution of 35mm film, the available blue screen technique at the time used photochemical optical technology to replace the colour blue. It required a very balanced background of a very narrow band of blue in order to generate a decent matte of the character. Simply covering the puppeteers in blue material created uneven lighting that would not produce a decent matte of the character. For a shot of Gizmo running, a technique called the Blue Max was used, created by the company Apogee. The technique utilised front projection, which was used for views of the cinema screen in the first Gremlins, with a 2-way mirror in front of the camera and a projected image looking at a 3M reflective screen, on which the background appeared through the camera lens. A shield was created behind the Gizmo puppet, covered in reflective 3M material. The shield would be puppeteered separately so the puppeteer could be as close to the puppet as possible. As this was a front projection system, the shield had to be rigidly parallel to the camera lens. However, with the Blue Max, the background would not be projected, but rather the colour blue would be projected onto the screen. The result would be blue screen photography without any blue light hitting Gizmo from behind, and this background would then be replaced photochemically as an optical in post-production. The other mobile shot of Gizmo involved the character dancing. With more need for rods operating his arms, the Blue Max proved insufficient. After the consultancy of company Illusion Arts and visual effects legend Albert Whitlock, the shot was filmed in front of a black screen with puppeteers wearing black close to the puppet. Rotoscoping was used to work around the shadows. If you pause and look closely, you can just barely make out the rods, but in real time, it works wonderfully. Illusion Arts and Whitlock were involved with another shot used in the film, an extension of the lobby for the Gremlins recital of New York, New York. Similarly to the cinema scene in the first film, the script required far more Gremlins than could be filmed or constructed. The camera was therefore locked off, and many Gremlins puppets were filmed in 8 separate portions of the frame, combined to be one. Extra passes were made of the shot to include a passing spotlight, confetti, and some balloons. If you look very closely, you can see the hard-edged square cut-off points of the balloons. A shot of Gizmo running from the collapsing boutique shop was executed by Hansard using rear projection, as were some shots where much larger puppets were used to show the Gremlins reproducing under the sprinkler system. The 2 establishing shots of New York that open the movie were filmed from a helicopter using a gyrosphere rig. These were photographed by director David Lane in the autumn of 1986. But didn't I say that the filming of Gremlins 2 began in May of 1989? Well, that's because these helicopter shots already existed. They had been originally filmed for the production of Superman 4: The Quest for Peace. These 2 shots appear in that movie during a fight with Nuclear Man over Metropolis.
Fun facts. Fun facts.
No, not fun facts. I can't stand fun facts. They're mostly unearned, unverified, out of context, misunderstood, mistranslated misinformation by creatures who've absolutely no idea what they're talking about. They're neither fun nor fact. There are absolutely no Gremlins in Gremlins 2 that were animated in a computer. Technically, Novacom Inc., who had previously worked on the intro to Twilight Zone the movie and display graphics for the Amblin-produced Inner Space with Dante and Fennell, provided many 3D computer-generated motion graphics for the various video displays around the Clamp building. This representation of the Gremlins seen here was indeed animated in a computer. So yes, technically there were Gremlins animated on a computer for the production of Gremlins 2: The New Patch. But not like that.
Fun facts.
Jerry Goldsmith returned as the film's music composer. He was assisted with source music by Alexander Courage and music underscoring the opening cartoon by Fred Steiner. The lavish orchestral score was performed by the Hollywood Studio Symphony and recorded digitally on a Mitsubishi X850. Synthesizers were all over Goldsmith's 80s work, including the first Gremlins. And all over Gremlins 2 are robotic drum machines, rattling synth sequences, and glissando. The synth sounds are a clever musical representation of both the Gremlins in the film as artificially affected beings and the smart building setting itself. Goldsmith's Gremlins 2 score has a sense of dignity and romance that it never asked for, but it benefits from entirely. This can be heard from the opening title music and Clamp's theme. On the other end of the spectrum, there is energetic Looney Tunes-like underscoring of the Gremlins' antics. Lush flutes and busy synthesizers exist together in harmony with a classic hint of George Gershwin. One music cue in the laboratory is music left over from Goldsmith's score to Joe Dante's The Burbs from the previous year. There's a good variety of existing music that is quoted in Goldsmith's score too, including New York, New York, the bridal chorus, and Nearer My God to Thee, which sounds infinitely better than the actual Ted Turner CNN End of the World tape rendition. These Gremlins 2 music numbers are just supposed to be re-recordings in a comedy film, yet Goldsmith's impressive new arrangements sound better than any other recording of these tracks in existence. I mean, they could have been played on a kazoo, and they still would have been appropriate. Listen to the soundtrack album. Mixed up with the Goldsmith score are many needle-dropped pop songs, ranging from 2 Jeff Beck songs, a track by Slayer, and then a bunch of songs owned by Warner Brothers. Having heavy metal as underscore in places really emphasises the anarchic behaviour of the Gremlins. Grandmaster Flash's The Message was scripted to appear as we first see Kate and Billy in Times Square, specifically to be heard with the lyrics, "It's like a jungle sometimes, it makes me wonder how I keep going under." This highlights the urban jungle setting that our small-town protagonists are now battling with. However, in the final film it's replaced by a song with exactly the same drum beat, Touch Me by Private Life, who were part of Warner Brothers Records and probably easier to license. Likewise, Gizmo was supposed to be dancing with Billy Idol's 1982 hit, Dancing With Myself, but, more fittingly, this was replaced by the song I'm Ready, coincidentally written by Grandpa Munster himself, Al Lewis. A tie-in music video was released for the song Bombers in the Sky by the Thompson Twins. It's a guitar pop song, but in the movie a much catchier house remix was used in the yogurt bar scene. Annoyingly, this promo-only remix was never available to purchase. Dante's film Inner Space also featured a great song that is almost equally impossible to track down. What a tease having great pop music you can't readily purchase. Dante has a previous connection to the Thompson Twins, which makes their inclusion on the Gremlins 2 soundtrack even more special.
She's got some stuffed animals on her bed, and it looks like some Thompson Twins records.
And if you wanted to go there, the song title, Bombers in the Sky, could arguably be taken as a link to the aircraft that the Gremlins terrified in World War II.
No!
An unreleased promo or radio mix of Jasmine Guy's Tough Boy also plays during this scene. It was produced by Oliver Lieber, who had a big hit at the time with Paula Abdul's Opposites Attract, which it kind of sounds like. As 1990 rolled around the corner, would green reptilian animatronic characters, missing the guidance of their Asian elder, interacting with humans in New York, be a box office success? Absolutely. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles the movie took the world by storm, but Gremlins 2 bombed. Joe Dante told the New York Times, Gremlins 2 jumps from joke to joke, the idea being, if you don't like something, it will be gone soon. The question is, how could you not like anything in the film? The first movie was set in a stylized, nostalgic world designed to remind you of old movies in order to sell the illusion of the puppets. Here it's opened up to the real-world imagery of downtown Manhattan, a clear time capsule of 1989. However, once we're inside the Clamp building, Mr. Wing's shop, or Billy and Kate's apartment, it is styled and great creative license has been taken to push the real world into the more fantastical. The difference between this and the first film, which had moments of suspense where the world purposefully felt static and claustrophobic, is that with Gremlins 2, it's an exciting film and you could get lost looking at it. The city, just like the movie, is busy and constantly moving. The building is a character in its own right. We only really see about 7 floors in total. The basement, the 2 floors of the lobby, the 45th, Billy's office on the 46th, Catheter's lab on the 51st floor, Clamp's presumably penthouse office, Studio D, and the 38th floor, which hosts Forster's security team at Systems Control. Dante's use of cameo parts from well-known character actors continues, from Gomez Adams actor John Astin mumbling to himself while Gizmo is attacked by the Mogwai, to an exercise in mime with Henry Gibson at the end of a CCTV camera. A deleted scene has former American footballers turned actors Bubba Smith and Dick Butkus as salad bar patrons who discuss the stock market before we see the Gremlins as brokers. Whereas the first film only had one real scene without human characters, Gremlins 2 has an entire subplot where Gizmo wanders around the building, gets tortured and eventually becomes a hero. Cartoon physics and logic go to the extreme of what we had seen the first time. In that film there was an adolescent sensibility to the little monsters, but here it's generally much more infantile. The Gizmo torture scenes, for example, range from the use of electrical cables to a photocopier shot like a 1960s photo shoot, Velcro, and a toy train with a real engine whistle sound, naughty and childish as opposed to a danger to Gizmo's life. The Gremlins seem to inflict more pain upon themselves for fun, sadist and masochistic pleasure in torturing each other. The film has its own audio-visual grammar, taken from the medium of Golden Age cartoons. Joe Dante is a fan of animation director Frank Tashlin, who began directing Warner Brothers cartoons before taking on live-action feature films such as the Bob Hope classic Son of Paleface. Tashlin brought a lot of the Looney Tunes logic, colour, tone and grammar to live action, and Dante does the same here. The height of this is when the Gremlins gather quite civilly in the lobby at the film's climax with party balloons and fancy dress to sing an extended musical number, a Hollywood love letter to New York, complete with bespoke costumes and set design and props, presumably created by the Gremlins themselves. We then visually learn their plot to specifically target the Statue of Liberty for absolutely no real reason, using illegal weapons that have materialized from nowhere, just like in a wacky Golden Age cartoon. Tonally, it makes the cartoonish bar scene from the original Gremlins movie look like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This leads Murray Futterman, who is deathly obsessed and nearly killed by the monsters in the first film, to remark,
"These guys aren't bad."
Even the moments of aggressive sexuality in the film, with women seducing terrified men, feels very much in a Tashlin spirit. Equally cartoonish is how these performers can say absurd and often wordy satirical dialogue with a completely straight face.
I have to have a complete situational long-term overview outlook perspective. It's as simple as that.
Do you see what these monsters are doing? They're throwing metal utensils into the microwaves. You can't do that.
All they have to do is to eat 3 or 4 children and there'd be the most appalling publicity.
Although Joe Dante reined things in when they got even too outlandish for Gremlins 2. The cartooniness is used to address the more earnestly silly elements from the first film, aiming more for comedy. From the rules of the Mogwai,
Look, I didn't make the rules, okay? Rules. I don't believe this.
as well as Kate's tragic Christmas trauma tale from the first film, involving her father dying dressed as Santa Claus in the chimney. Here she gives a similar, but completely different story.
This beard and a hat look just like Abe Lincoln.
Honey, I really don't think we've got time for this now, you know?
The response this time suggests indifference. Charlie Haas and executive producer Steven Spielberg had suggested including a SWAT team character, similar to comic book soldier Sergeant Rock, who enters the Clamp building but becomes subject to Roadrunner Coyote-style gags with the Gremlins. Ultimately, Joe Dante felt this was one character too many. The SWAT characters filmed for the movie seem to be a remnant of this. Gremlins 2 never attempts the all-out horror of the first film, but there is still some very effective jump scares and a change in mood and tone whenever it needs to that makes you go with it. This scene deserves an Olympic gold medal for its thrilling tonal gymnastics. Within a few minutes it goes from very broad and cynical consumer satire with characters yawning and lots of self-awareness to Looney Tunes violence before ending with lump-in-the-throat suspense, mystery and the realization that after all of that flippancy, this could be a hopeless fight for survival. The result is both funny and suspenseful at the same time. The film also looks gorgeous and interesting. Dante's intention was to fill the frame like a Mad Magazine panel with details in the margins. The actual Mad Magazine adaptation doesn't even come close to representing the manic detail of the movie, let alone send it up. The direction is masterful, with endless, immaculately blocked, unbroken shots with a precise rhythm that only an experienced editor could deliver. Whole scenes are played in a few or even one fluid shot, but with a variety of shot sizes. One of my favourite bits of direction is pretty subtle. When Kate is asked by Clamp if she's married to Billy, without hesitation she replies,
Yes. Well, I'm gonna be.
At the moment she says yes, the large drape blocking the window from the foyer is collapsed and daylight then pours through. The metaphorical light at the end of the tunnel, and narratively it closes both the love triangle subplot and the darkness that threatened Billy and Kate's relationship. Another is a camera pan from the evacuating camera operator of Marge's show, who passes Kasuji holding his own camera, setting him up for the job he was destined to do. Or Marla taking a breath spray before introducing herself to Clamp. As with the first Gremlins, there are many references to other movies, including Rick Baker's first movie, the Gremlins letting the classic Harryhausen black and white The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms onto the Clamp airwaves, Busby Berkeley's Dames, Lon Chaney's Phantom of the Opera, Batman,
Is it safe?
Marathon Man,
Is it safe?
King Kong, and The Wizard of Oz. An advert for Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing can be seen in Times Square, and Joe Dante's own The Howling gets a 10th sequel on the cinema marquee. Billy and Kate even live above a video store in this film. Other movies aside, Gremlins 2 revisits or recreates many elements from the first Gremlins movie. Mr. Wing's shop, a reference to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, syringes, microwaves, vomiting creatures, a mass transformation with Mario Bava coloured fog, blenders, creatures causing the camera to wobble, torn electrical wires, a female gremlin, camera flash, Gizmo taking cues from television, a flasher, drinking from a tap, guns, mallets, gremlins on TV, the gooey death of a lead gremlin, shadowy vent rooms, even the red toolbox Billy holds, which was integral to the ending of the original movie's second draft, Frank Sinatra, gremlins approaching a cinema screen. The people that made Gremlins 2 also have cameos as well. Director Joe Dante, writer Charlie Haas, composer Jerry Goldsmith, and Carol Goldsmith, whom he was married to. Joe Dante's friend Jonathan Kaplan is clearly referenced in an in-joke.
Remember what Dr. Kaplan said.
The apex of cinematic self-awareness is the complete fourth wall break, where the story stops and we divert to projection booth shadows, a vintage dirty movie, and a scene in which a cinema projectionist, played by Ken Tobey, who had a brief part in the first Gremlins, speaks with a cinema manager, played by Paul Bartel, who had appeared both in Dante's Hollywood Boulevard and Piranha, requesting the assistance of TV wrestling star Hulk Hogan in order to rid the cinema of monsters. According to Mike Fennell in Consequence of Sound, Clint Eastwood was asked first. Dante was a fan of William Castle and House on Haunted Hill, which used this gimmick of a ghost on a wire flying over the audience in the cinema. Dante had originally wanted cut-out gremlins on springs in the cinema projector booth of the cinemas screening Gremlins 2 during the sequence. Actually, Bartel's part had been originally written for a Steven Spielberg cameo, in which the director moans, "I knew I should have directed this myself." Even within a huge budgeted studio franchise movie, here is a scene that recreates the cost-effective cult spirit of Roger Corman's New World Pictures, where Dante began his career, inventively cutting film trailers and directing features featuring Paul Bartel. A VHS version was created using recycled footage of John Wayne from the movie Chisholm, imitated by Chad Everett. It all veers very close to the random, interactive, self-aware compilation film style that Dante loved growing up with Hope and Crosby, the Looney Tunes shorts, and especially Hellzapoppin'. Set in the world of showbiz and starring entertainers Olsen and Johnson, Hellzapoppin' is a film within a film. It has the loose framework of a convoluted love triangle. A poor writer trying to put on a hit musical and a rich wannabe actor love each other, but her parents instead want her to marry a rich guy. The movie is a gratuitous series of sketches with anarchic fourth wall breaking and absurd humour.
Rewind this film, will you?
What's the matter with you guys? Don't you know you can't talk to me and the audience?
Hey, Louie, will you keep your mind on your work? Will you get away from this? Oh! That nice, sweet, innocent girl is just a...
There's still a haze off as sweaters or no sweaters.
But even at its wildest, it has a sweet message of how love is better than wealth and is somewhat grounded by its young love triangle. Similarly, Gremlins 2 has a kind of young love triangle, which it is very grounded by. It has a strong heart, all played straight, at least as far as the main couple are concerned. Gizmo in Gremlins 2 bookends the film and has his own subplot, similarly to Olsen and Johnson. Hellzapoppin' is a film about film entertainment, its conventions, its mechanics, and its rules. Gremlins 2 is also a film about films and is a sequel to a film made to remind you of old films.
Come on, come on. That's it.
Sorry, folks. It won't happen again.
Dante told Starlog magazine that for this sequel, he had wanted to make Gremlins going to Hollywood, but felt that would be too inside. With a cable network and a camera operator as a character, Gremlins 2 is as close to being about the movies as it could get. The self-aware sketch compilation structure of Gremlins 2 is also similar to Dante's own work on the movie orgy. A few years before Gremlins 2, Dante also participated in the John Landis-presented comedy anthology film Amazon Women on the Moon, directing several segments. With a starry cast, the movie plays like one continuous channel serve of 1980s television, satirizing cable TV, VHS, and the treatment and choice of older movies as they would appear in the mid-1980s. And it's also got Paul Bartel in it. This absurd experience of channel surfing and the nonsense that results is all over Gremlins 2. Take this scene where the Gremlins attack film critic Leonard Maltin live on air, who actually gave the original Gremlins movie a bad review. A lot of these elements bleed into Gremlins 2's assault on 80s televised entertainment. Dante has said that the film was satirizing where cable TV was going, with a glut of channels devoted to one subject, and the film does this very well. There's something very specifically 80s about Gremlins 2, arguably more so than the first film. It has moments very much of its time.
I've been to Beirut.
Yeah, I bet they miss you there.
And it's sort of a movie about young strangers going to make it in New York. The New York of Mayor Ed Koch, the most exciting city we knew from film and TV.
I love this town!
Gremlins 2 has parallels with the sort of genre of mid to late 80s, Reagan-era, corporate yuppie, go-getter films, where young idealism has an adventure in the exciting Big Apple.
Well, Toto, guess we're not in Kansas anymore.
Two naive young people from the suburbs and an innocent pet from an antique store are lost in a maze of technology and corporate conformity. Clamp himself is lost in this maze too. Billy and Kate are officially the protagonists, but they don't really change as characters throughout and are true to themselves from beginning to end, even though their situation changes for the better. This is really Clamp's movie, as he is the character that changes from start to finish. Gremlins 2 is about the evils of taking something pure and turning it into something it's not. This is the theme of the movie and is echoed throughout, turning black and white films colorized, turning wholesome suburban kids into city rats, a Chinatown antique store into a modern business center, nature into mutant experiments in the genetics lab, a current affairs journalist into a horror movie host, home cooking into microwave meals. If Gremlins was about the death of community and the festering rot in a conservative, overly nostalgic small-town America, then Gremlins 2 is about the people who escaped the small old for an exciting bigger world of new, only to realize what they missed and who they really are. Through Clamp, Gremlins 2 is about the selfish corporate American baby boomers, aspirational but ultimately aimless, remembering their childhood innocence. Look at Clamp here, in one of the best shots in the movie. What happens to a powerful, big city businessman when they have achieved everything, but deep down it means nothing? Ironically, the most technological and powerful iteration of a gremlin ends up destroying the creatures. Gremlins 2 tells us to eschew superficial living and stay true to ourselves. The 1980s had been the time of the monster movie. Living, breathing, physical creatures were in all of the movies and TV, many of which were pretty scary to a child. It didn't even feel safe walking the aisles of the video store with these looking back at you. While on summer holiday in Canada of 1990, I saw this advert on television. It was terrifying. A scaly creature, like something from the video store, but sat at a desk, talking like a reserved gentleman. I didn't get the playful humour. The poster was set at night with a monster sat in a leather chair and, by the looks of it, wanting to take over New York City. After seeing the commercial, my cousin then asked if I had seen the original Gremlins. She was shocked to learn that I hadn't, and out came the VHS. I saw a mystical, hazy world and seemingly without humour, and lots of domestic locations that looked not unsimilar to the small-town North America I was visiting at that time. I felt horrified as I watched a snowplow flatten a house down, a vulnerable old woman cruelly murdered for entertainment, and an off-camera description of a Santa Claus enactment gone wrong. The trip to Dory's bar seemed comparable to visiting hell, and the idea of Stripe getting away and reproducing made my child self very anxious. It was so mean-spirited, and I was aghast at how nobody bothered to obey the very clear and straightforward rules of the Mogwai, especially as Gizmo actively tries to prevent them from being broken. That being said, I was reduced to babbling tears by this. A boy and his best friend separated. About 6 months later, I saw this image played on a TV in an Asda supermarket in the UK. It was Gremlins 2, the whole movie, played on a loop, mute. The movie had a 15 certificate, so why it was being shown was anyone's guess. I watched the whole thing without sound, probably twice. In the oncoming weeks, I returned to Asda, and I would drink in as much of Gremlins 2 as I could. In 1994, the film premiered on broadcast TV, and I recorded it onto VHS. It very quickly became a favourite. Gremlins 2 has been a rock, a film I can revisit over and over again, a film I watch when I should be watching other films. I have stayed in by myself happily on so many Friday and Saturday nights to watch Gremlins 2. In the past, whenever it has appeared on TV, I have dropped everything and watched the whole thing to the end, over and over. And yet, the film's only true weakness is the reason it probably connects with me and others of my generation most. Famed animation director Chuck Jones made a nice appearance in the first Gremlins movie, and it's lovely that he gets to direct the pre-title and post-credit cartoon scenes of Gremlins 2. Beginning with an anarchic Warner Brothers short sets the tone for the movie in an inspired, misleading way. However, the animation and design for this sequence unfortunately looks less like the classic Warner Brothers shorts and more in line with the 1970s and 80s TV specials, which were repeated often at the time. As such, these Gremlins 2 bookends don't feel cinematic, but very televisual. And that makes it even more special for me for a very particular reason. Aside from the opening with Mr. Wing, most of the film takes place over 2 days. It goes into an evening of leisure and recreation at the Clamp building, which must make it a Friday night, the traditional weekly evening when the Western world lets its hair down. Billy is released from jail at 6:30 AM the following day, meaning most of the film takes place during a Saturday morning and into the afternoon, when the musical number happens in real time somewhere between 3 and 4 PM. Every millennial I know grew up with the ritual of Saturday morning broadcast television, and these became longer the older we grew, to the point where everyone I knew had satellite and cable, which, just like in Gremlins 2, provided entire channels dedicated to one thing, in this case, kids' cartoon programming. Actually, in a split second of the film, we can see a newspaper labelled Sunday, contradicting my theory, but I don't believe it was intended to be seen. It makes me very nostalgic for the blue-skied Saturday mornings I experienced between the non-stop school weeks. Gremlins 2 is a literal Saturday morning cartoon experience come to life. Mr. Wing warns Gizmo of being exposed to television. Well, we were a generation brought up on deregulated toy commercials and kids' television, and we were constantly told how too much television was bad for us. Steven Spielberg's 1990s cartoon projects at Warner Brothers, Tiny Toons, Animaniacs, and Freakazoid, all feel very much in line with the hyper-self-aware tone of Gremlins 2. As millennials, we are the heavily TV-influenced Gremlins in this movie. Gremlins 2 in many ways reminds me of Mel Brooks' film Spaceballs. It is also a genre parody, satirizing 80s corporate creative decisions about something pure becoming too much.
Merchandising, where the real money from the movie is made.
A big float in the Macy's Day Parade. Has anybody ever talked to you about merchandising?
It also has references to popular movies and a bold fourth wall break smack in the middle of it. It too has a romance played straight between two beautiful but naive young leads, giving it heart to sustain the running time. Plus, it shares a bear also seen in Hellzapoppin'. Both films were making fun of things millennials are now deeply emotionally nostalgic for and pay huge money to consume. Clamp's World was supposed to be a commentary on corporate coldness, but it's a place I'd happily pay to go to. I'm utterly obsessed with every second of Gremlins 2, even the end credits, the way they go white text on black to blue, and Daffy disgruntled about the overlong crawl for the creature crew, which seemed absurdly long even at the turn of the century.
Patently ridiculous.
Gremlins 2 is not the emotionally burdenous, traumatic, slow-build suspense, long-form festive horror movie with the bittersweet ending that the first film is. Gremlins 2 is a self-aware sequel to a standalone original film that puts a mirror up to sequels and the modern world itself. In doing so, it catches lightning in a bottle, oozing the passion, pure personality and soul of its director and everyone else involved. It's biting, subversive and satirical with its approach to the first film's characters, storytelling and tone, while adding a mostly time capsule real-world New York setting, an irresistible energy, a busyness, world-class filmmaking, and a hyper-happy ending with closure to all of the trauma of the first film. It took time, but those who grew up with and loved Gremlins 2 eventually came to have a voice.
We're writing Gremlins 2. It should be a party.
I think it's now up there.
It's great.
And I actually think Gremlins 2, the new batch, is a f***ing masterpiece.
It's a happy ending to a tale begun over 100 years ago in the RAF. As for the Rick Baker designed Gizmo now appearing on the original Gremlins poster, well, fun fact, in the 2000s when they came around to do